One of the darkest chapters in American history revolves around an individual who found himself condemned to death row following a brutal attack on two individuals. Strangely, he later earned the curious moniker of the happiest man on death row. To decipher this enigmatic tale, it is crucial to delve into the life of Joe Arridy, comprehend the circumstances leading to his imprisonment, and explore the origins of his unusual nickname. Joe Arridy, born in 1915, spent his formative years in the steel town of Pueblo, Colorado. His life journey commenced with an extraordinary challenge, as he remained nude for the first 5 years of his existence. As he ventured into formal education, it swiftly became evident to his educators that Arridy would not flourish in a conventional academic environment. In an effort to provide him with appropriate guidance, his mother initially took on the responsibility of homeschooling him. Nevertheless, when he reached the age of 10, his parents faced the heartbreaking decision of enrolling him in the Colorado State School for Children with Developmental Disabilities. Medical records from his tenure at the school offered a grim assessment of Arridy's cognitive capacities, with doctors estimating his IQ at a mere 46 points. This placed him in the lowest echelons of mental acuity, a category inhabited by less than 1% of the global population. To put this in context, the average IQ typically falls within the range of 90 to 100 points. The story of Joe Arridy unfolds as a tragic and baffling narrative, shedding light on the intricacies of the criminal justice system and society's treatment of individuals with intellectual disabilities. In the early stages of Joe Arridy's childhood, his life took a divergent trajectory. In 1925, at the tender age of 10, he found himself enrolled in the State School for Children with Developmental Disabilities. Yet, medical evaluations painted a grim picture of his development, likening it to that of a 6-year-old child. Although Arridy could communicate verbally, he grappled with fundamental tasks like singing, writing, basic mathematics, and even remembering colors. It didn't take long for perceptive doctors at the school to discern that young Joe was susceptible to the influence of his peers. On one occasion, his fellow students persuaded him to confess to a theft he hadn't committed, a confession he readily embraced. After a year of intensive training, Arridy displayed improved adaptability to societal norms, prompting his return home. However, no structured support system was in place for him, and he was not reintegrated into an educational environment. Consequently, he aimlessly roamed the streets throughout the day. Eventually, his parents managed to enroll him in a mainstream school, but his integration into the curriculum remained severely limited. In 1929, 4 years later, due to his disruptive behavior, Arridy found himself back in the public school system. He remained there for 7 years, a period marked by numerous escape attempts, all futilely thwarted by authorities. Upon his departure from school in 1936, at the age of 21, Arridy became increasingly isolated, leading a vagabond existence with sporadic visits to his family's home. However, this trajectory underwent a dramatic transformation following a fateful and life-altering event that occurred in late summer. On the night of August 15, 1936, a chilling incident unfolded. While the parents of 12-year-old Barbara Drain and her 15-year-old sister, Dorothy, were away on a visit, an intruder invaded their home with sinister intentions toward the sleeping girls. Tragically, this malevolent act left the younger sister in a coma, from which she miraculously recovered, but the elder sister, Dorothy, met a devastating and untimely end. The pursuit of justice in Dorothy's murder began, and the Colorado police cast suspicion upon Frank Aguilar, a Mexican national employed by the girl's father. Compelling evidence pointed in his direction. Barbara, after regaining consciousness from a week-long coma, promptly identified Aguilar as the assailant. Moreover, a search of Aguilar's residence uncovered an axe remarkably similar to the murder weapon. Despite these significant pieces of evidence, legal proceedings faced substantial delays, primarily because Aguilar vehemently denied involvement in the crime. As public outcry escalated, putting immense pressure on law enforcement, securing a confession became paramount. This led authorities to focus their attention on Joe Arridy. Joe Arridy, who harbored a profound fear of the police, became an easy target for detectives who skillfully induced him to admit to a crime he had not committed. Astonishingly, within a mere day, law enforcement officials presented a written confession, attributing it to Joe Arridy, despite the 21-year-old's significant difficulties in writing block letters, making it highly implausible that he could have created such a document unassisted. Furthermore, officers managed to coax Arridy into falsely stating that he had used a baseball bat to harm the girls, even though subsequent investigation revealed that the murder weapon was, in fact, an axe. The enigma surrounding the identity of Dorothy Drain's killer took a confounding twist when both Joe Arridy and Frank Aguilar became entangled in accusations. Aguilar, seeking to deflect blame, cast suspicion on Arridy, who, bewildered by the unfolding events, meekly complied without asserting his rights or offering a defense. It would take several years before the astonishing revelation surfaced that Arridy might not have even been in town on the fateful night of the crime. Notably, Frank Aguilar had previously skillfully navigated a similar accusation in his criminal history when he assaulted a sleeping housekeeper, although the housekeeper managed to thwart his advances, and he evaded significant punishment. The circumstances surrounding his evasion of justice remained shrouded in mystery. The case against Arridy hinged on scant evidence, primarily a hair discovered at the crime scene that could potentially have been linked to Joe. The second piece of evidence derived from his confession and the claim that he seemed to recognize Aguilar, as he identified him as "That's Frank" when asked to identify an alleged accomplice. Life on death row for Joe Arridy was a bewildering experience filled with uncertainties. Given his extreme suggestibility, it proved challenging to ascertain whether he had been coerced into identifying Frank Aguilar or if there was any prior connection between them. During the court proceedings, Barbara Drain, with unwavering conviction, maintained that Aguilar was her assailant and that she had never encountered Arridy before. Nevertheless, despite the lack of concrete evidence, Joe Arridy was sentenced to death on December 22, 1936. His legal defense pursued appeals, arguing that Arridy's testimony should not be considered reliable due to his limited intellectual capacities. To substantiate this claim, they posed straightforward questions to Arridy in the courtroom, asking about his knowledge of figures like George Washington or his familiarity with the appearance of an axe. Unfortunately, Joe struggled to provide coherent responses. Yet in 1937, the jury determined Arridy to be fully sane and accountable for his actions. Interestingly, it seemed that Arridy remained oblivious to the gravity of his predicament. While incarcerated on death row, he found solace in playing with his toys, engaging in conversations with fellow prisoners, and even granting interviews to journalists, displaying a demeanor that defied the grim reality of his situation. Life on death row for Joe Arridy was a bewildering experience filled with uncertainties. Given his extreme suggestibility, it proved challenging to ascertain whether he had been coerced into identifying Frank Aguilar or if there was any prior connection between them. During the court proceedings, Barbara Drain, with unwavering conviction, maintained that Aguilar was her assailant and that she had never encountered Arridy before. Nevertheless, despite the lack of concrete evidence, Joe Arridy was sentenced to death on December 22, 1936. His legal defense pursued appeals, arguing that Arridy's testimony should not be considered reliable due to his limited intellectual capacities. To substantiate this claim, they posed straightforward questions to Arridy in the courtroom, asking about his knowledge of figures like George Washington or his familiarity with the appearance of an axe. Unfortunately, Joe struggled to provide coherent responses. Yet in 1937, the jury determined Arridy to be fully sane and accountable for his actions. Interestingly, it seemed that Arridy remained oblivious to the gravity of his predicament. While incarcerated on death row, he found solace in playing with his toys, engaging in conversations with fellow prisoners, and even granting interviews to journalists, displaying a demeanor that defied the grim reality of his situation. In the moments leading up to his passing, Joe Arridy bestowed his most cherished possession, a toy train, upon a fellow prisoner, and made an unconventional request for his final meal, a simple serving of ice cream. When asked for his last words, Arridy responded with unwavering good-naturedness, expressing his intent to raise chickens and play the harp in heaven. A prison warden, reflecting on Joe Arridy in an interview, offered a poignant perspective. "The man we executed was a mere 6-year-old at heart, devoid of comprehension as to why his life was being taken. He remained the most cheerful soul on death row." Remarkably, this prison warden had staunchly advocated for Joe Arridy's life until the very end. He personally financed legal representation, successfully securing 9 postponements of Arridy's death sentence. However, the intervention of the governor ultimately sealed Arridy's fate, culminating in his execution on January 7, 1939. He was laid to rest at Woodpecker Hill. In the moments before his demise, Joe Arridy recited a child's rendition of a prayer twice, as he struggled to memorize the adult version. As the fateful execution unfolded, tears welled up in the eyes of the warden and a select few witnesses, a poignant testament to the profound tragedy of the situation. The following day, the media featured headlines that reverberated across the nation, such as "23-year-old executed for murder, New York Daily News," noting that he had worn a smile moments before his untimely death. Yet these headlines could do little to rectify the profound injustice that had befallen this wrongfully convicted man.